Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Betty Guadagno.
Guadagno.
Okay. And you're in New York,
Yes.
and you're going to tell us about your near-death like experience. Okay.
Yeah. Thank
All
you
right.
so much for asking me to be on here. I'm really excited. My spirit gets so filled whenever I get asked to share about my experience. And yeah, I'll take you through the
Okay.
journey of my life. So I'll start off with painting a picture of my background for you for contrast. And I grew up in like a very chaotic, dysfunctional home. My whole family is immersed in poverty and drug addiction. There's a lot of sexual trauma that goes on in my family. And so you're taught at a very young age to use drugs because it helps you cope with your experience. My parents taught me how to use, their parents taught them how to use. And it's been that way for generations and generations. And it is exhausting being the one to break all the generational curses, but that's what I'm here to do. So I grew up, like using drugs, abusing anything that I could get my hands on, whether it was food or a substance or men or, like getting lost inside of fantasy, like anything to not feel what my experience actually was. And let me share some of my trauma with you. Growing up, my parents, like I said, they were both addicts, and our life became very chaotic towards the end of their active addiction. And in 2007, they made a decision to stop using drugs, and they did that by committing suicide with each other. It was a devastating loss. I mean, like you can only imagine. My sister was 18 when that happened. I was 23, and we found our parents, and my life just transformed after that. Like I was already an addict before they died, but this loss, it just melded me to drugs. Like drugs became my whole identity. There was two voices after their death. One voice said, you should let go of drugs, they just killed your parents. And the other voice said, you have to keep using drugs, it's all that you have left of them. And that voice just seemed to make more sense, and it was more familiar to me. And so I stayed on drugs throughout my life. And like I said, it became my whole identity. Like I thought I was some kind of party girl. I was a bartender. Like this was my lifestyle. And it became very unmanageable. Like at first I thought that I was like a functioning drug user. I wouldn't even use the word addict because I thought like, well, I still have a job. I still can pay my bills. I still have a house. Like I don't have a problem. Everybody else has a problem. I don't. And then it progressed, and the last couple of years of my active addiction, my life evaporated. I mean, it was 20 years in the making, but it seemed like it happened so quickly. Like one day I was okay using and maintaining a life, and then the next day it was just, completely, there was no way to do that. And towards the end of my active addiction, I had experienced some more trauma in my life. As life went on, I experienced some more loss. I had a boyfriend that passed away, and I felt like very guilty and responsible for that death. I felt like it was like a drug induced thing. And, like we were using drugs because of me. And I don't even think that he liked using drugs. He just really liked me. And so after that death, I made a deal with myself that I would do this insane amount of drugs. And if I didn't die, I would go get help. And I woke up and I went to go get help, and I tried, like I really did. Like I went to detox, I went to rehab, I went into the rooms of 12-step fellowship, and I just didn't believe that I was worth a life, like I just really didn't. Um, and I felt like kind of survivor's guilt from my parents. Like, how do I think that I can recover? And they didn't get a chance to. And so I went back out using drugs again. And that's when my life just completely, I became a dumpster for drugs. Like I had an opiate addiction for 20 years. And in the last couple of years of my active addiction, I really just started using any and everything. And I ended up overdosing on hallucinogens. And I went to the space of eternity. So I'm going to take you through that. Like I said, I had given myself an overdose of hallucinogens just because I was going to go do my laundry. And I was like, I might as well get messed up to go do my laundry. And while I was at the laundromat, I realized that I had taken way too much. And I started to have like all of these conscious thoughts enter my head. I was like, what am I doing here? How do I know what laundry is? How do I know that clothes get dirty? And just all of these thoughts just started flooding me. And so I started to go home, and I lived about 6 blocks from the laundromat. And as I was walking, I would get to a corner and it would say Madison and Stuyvesant. And then I would walk to the next corner and it would say Madison and Stuyvesant again. And again, I did it. And it was like I was stuck inside of this loop, and the fabric of reality just started crashing around me. The whole world got washed in the brightest white light I've ever experienced. And all of the buildings around me, all of these brownstones in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, they all crumbled to the ground, and all that was left was the green lines of matrix code that make them up. And so I started to sprint home now because I just didn't know what was going on. And when I entered my house, I walked in and I saw my reflection in the mirror, and I thought, I have no idea who that is. And then it felt like my mother's consciousness had sort of taken over my own. And I remember looking in the mirror and saying out loud, what are we doing inside of our daughter? And I heard this masculine voice present itself to me. And it felt like it was my father. It also felt like a couple of other masculine energies in my life, and they were kind of morphed into this one energy. And I was reminded of what we had done. And I felt myself feel the pain and grief and guilt of committing suicide. And, like I had this spare bedroom, there was an empty bed in there, and it sort of transformed into my parents' bedroom scene, the scene where they had died. And I threw myself on the bed and I was inconsolable. And then I started to experience what I now have language for. Then I did not, but I experienced a Kundalini awakening. And if you don't know what Kundalini energy is, that's okay. Neither did I. Kundalini energy is described as life force energy. Some people call it receiving the Holy Spirit. And it's a complete opening of all of your chakra systems. And again, I had no language for any of this before, like spirituality and God were not part of my life. Drugs were my God. They were my whole identity. There was no space for anything else. So what I experienced was this full chakra opening. So there was this surge of energy going up and down my spine. Kundalini energy is like dictated or like illustrated as a coiled serpent at the base of your spine. And when your Kundalini arises, the serpent straightens up. And so all your chakras open. So as I was experiencing this chakra opening, it was like violent shaking my body, And as my crown and my third eye opened, it was like my soul was blasted out of my body. And again, I was a devout atheist at this point in time. I didn't believe in souls or anything other than what was going on in this reality. And so I found myself in the space of eternity, and I was guided through this space again by this masculine voice that I was perceiving. That was every masculine energy that I've ever perceived in my life. And, I was taken in and shepherded into the vibration of unconditional love. And I felt like this huge sense of unworthiness, like, I don't believe in this. How could I be here? And, I just thought that it was like drug-induced psychosis, because all I knew was that I had taken a bunch of drugs, and now here I thought I was like chilling in heaven. And, so I had this feeling of unworthiness try to take me over. And when that happened, it was like quickly combated away. And I was shown that unconditional love is the ultimate truth. And in that space, I was taken through the vibration of every emotion. So I wasn't only shown unconditional love, I was also shown the vibration of the deepest, darkest despair that we perceive here. And I was shown, I was put into the awareness of every woman that I've ever known in my life who's lost a child. And so I was put into the scene where they, as a mother, were told that their children were dead or found their children's bodies. And it was just the darkest, the deepest, darkest contrast that you could ever imagine, like being in this unconditional love, in the vibration of creation, and then being in the vibration of your creation dying. And I just thought that I could perceive my body outside myself, and just the tears, and my whole face was so swollen. And I just thought that I would stop, like breathing. I would stop existing because this pain was so intense. So, I was perceiving that I was asking a lot of questions in this time. I had asked, like, what is creation? Shown unconditional love. Well, why isn't creation like that? Shown the vibration of the perception of death. And then I was taken through my place in every pantheon, every mythological family. I was shown my place as the divine feminine energy in the family. So every form of mythology, Egyptian, Roman, Greek, Nordic, I saw my place. I saw myself as Adam and Eve in the garden. And I thought that it was me, like me individually. I was like, oh my God, I'm Eve. I destroyed creation. I can't believe it. And thank goodness for my integration process, because I found out later that it wasn't just me, like I am part of everything that is. There's this oneness to all of us. And so we are all that. And I perceived that I was taken into, I guess I could describe it as like a classroom or like a laboratory. And I was shown my pre-birth planning in this space. So I was shown that I, as a soul, had chosen everything that had ever happened in my life up until this point. And I had chosen everything that will happen after this point. And I just completely refused the idea of this, even in the space of heaven. I was like, this is nuts. There's no way that I chose my parents, that how they would die, this, all like the trouble that I've had in my life, all of this hardship and adversity. And they said, well, you did, and they took me through the moment when I, as a soul, had chosen all of these things. And the way that my mind perceived it was that like a video game. And I saw myself in this grocery store, and I had this empty grocery cart in front of me. There was a man guiding me. He was wearing a plaid blazer and a fedora. And he said, pick your life. And so, like this little eager soul that I was like, I'm going to Earth. I'm going to Earth. And I started pulling all of these boxes off the shelves. They looked like cereal boxes. Like I want to experience addiction. I want to experience poverty. I want to experience suicide loss. I want to experience suicide attempts. And then there was things in the cart that I hadn't experienced yet. There was recovery, there was overcoming, there was soulmates, there was kindred relationships, there was community. And, like I hadn't experienced any of those things yet. So as I was shown this, I saw the moment when I chose the souls that I would experience this with. And the way that it looked was like these two orbs coming to each other and saying, okay, this is our role with each other. And then I was downloaded with the understanding that our roles have been switched in other lives. So, like I had experienced some sexual trauma as a child, and I had used it as like this this cape of victimization for myself, for my life, as well as my parents' suicide. Like everything that had happened in my life, I wore it as a cape of victimization so that I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and nobody could tell me anything else. And I saw the moment that the soul that had induced this sexual trauma in me as a child, that I had been the abuser in his life, in a previous life, and that, we were balancing out our karma with each other and experiencing this situation from both ends with each other. And, like in this moment of being downloaded with this belief, it was like 2 tons of bondage had just come off of my back. Like I was no longer a victim to my circumstance. I was actually a divine co-creator of my experience. And it was just this beautiful gift. And it really felt like a whole weight had come off me. And so I begged to stay in this space. I was like, okay, this is great. I'm home. I'm so happy to be home. Like I accept what you guys are saying. Like, what do we do now? And they said to me, well, no, you have to go back to Earth. You're not finished. And I was like, oh, I'm finished. I'm not going back. And they said, listen, the first half of your life was like boot camp. And the second half of your life will be carrying out your mission. It will not be nearly as difficult as the first part of your life was. You can trust that. And I was like, I do not trust you. They said, this is the most exciting time to be on earth. You're a spiritual soldier and you're here for the ascension of earth. You're here to uplift the consciousness of the planet. And I was like, I quit. No, thank you. I don't want to be here for this. I said, you guys don't actually tell us how challenging earth really is. Like you have no perception of what it's actually like. I said, it's dense, it's dark, it's suffering, it's sadness, and I will not go back. I said, I definitely will not go back into her. I said, she needs mountains of healing, and there's no way that I can accomplish that. And I could see my body outside myself as I was saying this. And they said, okay, you don't have to go back into her, but you do have to go back because you haven't even balanced this life. And so they showed me the baby that I would be born into. And again, it looked like a video game. I saw like this little 3D avatar of this little baby on sort of like a screen. That's how I perceived it. And then next to the baby, I saw her stats, like everything about her ethnicity, her gender, the adversity that she would have, what kind of family she would be born into, her parents, the traumas that she would endure. And I couldn't, like I saw all of this. It was a life that had even deeper levels of hardship than my own that I had already experienced. And I thought, I can't start from zero. And I said, okay, I'll go back into her if this is my only choice. And they said it is. And they told me that I could live a life that beyond anything that I've ever thought, that I was going to have divine mentors, synchronicities, friendships come into my life that were going to guide me on to the rest of the mission. All I had to do was just let go of drugs, and that would be my catalyst into the next part of my life. And so, again, I all I thought to myself was, whoa, I am so high that drugs just broke up with me. Like all I knew was that I took a bunch of drugs and now all of a sudden some voice was telling me that I had to stop taking them. And so I came back from this experience. Again, I just wrote it off as drug-induced psychosis because who wouldn't? Like I was a devout atheist, like I was a drug addict. This was not part of my picture. And so I went about my life and I just continued to use drugs. And I just thought this was like the craziest hallucinogenic trip that I would ever experience. And I would never be that messed up ever again. And then the universe stepped in and it made itself so known to me in this super loud way, letting me know that this was not a hallucination. This was a real experience that had happened and my life really needed to change. So divine synchronicities, all of the drug dealers that I had been dealing with for over a decade, all simultaneously decided to change their lives and stop selling drugs so that I had no way to get them. I'm talking about people that did not know each other, like all made this decision simultaneously. And so, I started to, like I said, I had an opiate addiction. Drugs just began to not work, or wherever I was getting drugs from, they were not working. And again, I feel like this is another divine synchronicity that the drugs just stopped working. And I was on day 3 of heroin withdrawal, which is just the absolute worst. Like the reason why I stayed on that particular drug for so long was not because I enjoyed it or like I was even getting high. It was because I was trying to avoid this physical sickness that you get when you let go of that particular drug. And so I was on day 3, so sick. I was in my bed, sweating, screaming, crying, sick all over myself. And I had a thought and I said it out loud. And I said, man, I am so sick right now that I couldn't even kill myself if I wanted to. I couldn't even get up out of this bed and figure out a way to kill myself. And, like this was my moment of mental, spiritual suicide. Like even if I didn't actually physically kill myself, some piece of me did in that thought. And I heard this voice and it said, you can request what you want fixed. And, I'm like in the throes of desperation at this point, and I'm willing to believe anything. I hear a voice in my head. I'm like, okay, voice, whatever you say. And I was very over intellectual about it when I said what I wanted fixed. And I even wrote it down on a Post-it note next to me. I said, I want my pain receptors and my neurotransmitters fixed. I want to no longer be physically dependent on heroin. I didn't say that I wanted to be rid of my drug addiction because I still definitely wanted to use other drugs. I just didn't want to be physically tethered to this one substance. And so the voice told me to lay back in my bed and to begin to meditate, to count down. And as I did, I saw these two men appear in my mind's eye. And they were these little white, bald men with these bulbous noses. They were wearing white lab coats. And then these little lawnmowers appeared in front of them. They like poofed right in front of them. And so I'm staring at these men, and they're kind of just staring at me, like sort of jumping up and down because of the lawnmower. And then I watched them go through the crevices of my brain. And as they walked through in these different directions, going through each crevice of my brain, I felt these intense hot tingles. And I knew that in that moment, I was being healed. And after they had finished going through my brain, I felt these X's go across my forehead. It felt like someone's thumb. And then I felt a palm on my forehead, and it felt like a plunger on the crown of my head. And as the plunger plunged down and lifted back up, this huge white flash went, before me in my mind's eye. And I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. Like for the contrast of who I was at this point in time, like I was a devout atheist, militant, radical atheist. I was a drug addict. I was a sex worker. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was all of the things that you would think wouldn't make you worthy of being bestowed with grace. And there I was being bestowed with grace. And, my path became crystal clear after that. I mean, like 1 second before I was throwing up on myself, and the next second I was able to jump up out of bed and like scream at the top of my lungs that like God exists and God loves me and I can't believe it. And so I went out I went to the subway, like just to get out of my house. My house felt like it was making me sick, like physically ill. And so I just sat on a train, and I had no destination. I just was like, what is going on? I had no idea. And then as I was sitting on this train, a man appeared across from me, and he was wearing a 12-step fellowship necklace. And I heard a voice, and it said, "That's your path. Follow him to a meeting." And that was on June 1st, 2019. And I've been clean ever since. And I went to a few more meetings over the next couple of days. And when I came into this process, I did not look the way that I look now. I was like very strung out, skinny, sunken in. My skin looked gray. I had like no back teeth. I only had a couple of teeth in my mouth. And, like I walked into this meeting and I looked messed up. You could tell that I had really been through it. And this woman, she grabbed me like she knew me. She didn't, but she did, because like we're in the same place. And she grabbed me so tight, and she whispered in my ear, and she said, "You are deserving of all of the love in the universe." And I believed her. And I knew that she was an angel that was sent in my path to give me that message. And in that moment, like my whole awareness transformed. And I just thought for a second, maybe I am worthy of all the love in the universe. Maybe this is happening because I am worthy. And I went to a meeting the next day, and I found myself sitting in this meeting of 80 people. And I swear to you, every person was sharing directly to me. I mean, they weren't, but it felt like they were, like every share in the room was like a message directly from source to me. And it was telling me that I had to get on a different path. And then I heard a voice, and it told me to look over to my right. And I looked over, and I was sitting next to the program director of a long-term women's facility here in Brooklyn, a long-term rehab. And I knew it. Out of 80 people, how am I sitting right next to this woman who can help me change my life? All I have to do is just surrender and let her. And so I had a plan. I was going to talk to the woman after the meeting and beg her for a bed in her facility. And when the meeting ended, I had finally gotten up my courage to go over and talk to her. And when I looked over, she was gone. She had left the meeting early, and I felt totally defeated. But I did have a plan. I was going to call the rehab and, and ask for help. And so I went on the bus to go home. And as I stepped onto the bus, that woman was sitting right there. She had left the meeting early and somehow was on the exact same bus as me, not at the bus stop in front of the meeting, because that's where I was. And I ran up to her totally manic, and I was like, "Oh my God, you are actually an angel. You're sent to earth. You're here for me. This is totally divine. I wanted to talk to you inside, but you were gone." And And I said, can you help me? And she said, yeah, we can help you. Come by tomorrow. We have a bed. And this woman was saying a sentence that was about to change my whole life, you know? And I went there the very next day with just the clothes on my back. I didn't have anything. I was about to be evicted. I hadn't paid my rent in 2 years because drugs were just more important. And the marshal was going to come any day to change the locks. And so there was nothing to take. And so I went to this program, and I swear to you, there was a huge hand on my back pushing me through the door because, like I said, this was not going to be part of my picture. I was perfectly content living and dying the way that I was. I was very comfortable in my discomfort because it's all that I had ever known. And so I went to this facility, and it was hardcore, like it's a long-term program, 9 to 12 months. I ended up staying there for 17 months. And, like you're trying to heal with 25 other women, and it's not pajama parties and pillow fights. It's serious work. And, I learned how to be a person there. Like I was the kind of addict who I couldn't even get up and brush my teeth without being high first. Like I didn't know what that was. And so I had to learn how to do everything all over again. I had to learn how to make a bed. I had to learn how to, like eat at certain times. I had, and I had to check in with everything. In this program, they made you ask somebody who had been there longer to go into the refrigerator for you. And I was like, this is crazy. I know how to use a refrigerator. And now I realize in hindsight that it wasn't about the refrigerator. It was about asking somebody for help. Like I need to ask for help in my life. I don't know how to live my life properly. I need somebody to help me. And not only to check in with other people about how I'm living my life, but to check in with my higher power. Like I have to ask source all the time. Like, is this the right decision? Like, can I go down this path? And is this for the highest good? So I stayed there for 17 months. Like I said, I got to go to school while I was there. I became a peer advocate. I actually have a job in the recovery field today, and I help other people with their addiction, which is just crazy. Like I said, I was immersed in sex work and everything that goes along with that. And I caused a lot of harm to other people and to myself. And today I have this amazing opportunity to make a universal amends, and I assist people on their healing journeys today. And it's more than I ever could have thought for myself. And, like my integration process happened inside of that treatment center because I didn't have to worry about paying bills or going to work or cooking meals. All I had to do was just sit and learn and read and heal and feel and learn. And I did that. I read every sacred text while I was there. I had this insatiable thirst for knowledge, and I got to cherry pick the things that I liked out of each teaching that I felt resonated with me, that I could develop my own spirituality around. A Course in Miracles found its way into my awareness while I was in that treatment center, and I devoured that book. And if you don't know what that is, it's a metaphysical text. It's channeled by Jesus, and it's a reprogramming of self. And when I read that book, I thought that I would ascend. When I was finished, I thought, oh, this is a handbook for the recently deceased. That's me. And when I finish reading this book, I'll get to leave my body and go back home. And when I got to the last paragraph of the book, I took off my shoes. I laid back in my bunk bed. Yes, I lived in a bunk bed for 1.5 years. And I really thought that I was going to leave my body. And I got to the last word and nothing happened. And I was still here. But I had a lot more information. I had information that I needed. And in that process, I realized that it's not about going back to heaven. It's about bringing heaven here. And that's what I do with my life today. And I do that by being immersed in spiritual community, by giving back, by being of service. It is my passion, my purpose, my everything to be of service. And I do that in whatever way I can. And, it's not always about like actively looking for solutions for people to be of service. Sometimes it's just about being a shining light and just sitting and listening. And so, like thanks to my spiritual practices and my spiritual beliefs that I have in my life today, my whole life has transformed. Like every cell in my body absolutely demanded to transform 180 degrees. The things that were working for me before no longer work for me. And so I have new things in my life, new people in my life, new places in my life. And I'm so grateful to be able to share this very vulnerable piece of myself with you today. Thank you for letting me share.
You're welcome. You mentioned about it was like you was in a store, I think.
Mhm.
That's strange because I'm the only one that I know of that in my near-death experience, when I was 25, died of internal bleeding from ectopic pregnancy. Um, there a scene opened up and it was like I had just walked into this store. And so
Ah.
and it's like, who else talks about seeing this store, in your experience? But it was nothing that a memory for me, not it was to show me, to illustrate something.
Mhm.
So I thought,
Wow.
oh gosh, that's so weird. It's like I've never heard anybody else mention a store and their experience.
That's amazing. Yeah. Like I said, it kind of looked like a video game to me. And so a lot of it was however my brain could process those things, So it kind of looked like Sims, with the video game Sims, which is, yeah, what I perceive as happening here, Sims Earth. And yeah, that's just the way that my brain could process it because of the generation that I grew up in and the imagery that I'm aware of. And I feel like for other people, it might come up differently, but that the bottom belief remains.
So what was that like when you left the recovery center?
It was really challenging. In fact, using drugs had been my coping strategy for uncomfortable feelings. Well, any feeling, every feeling is uncomfortable. So when I left the treatment center, I developed different coping strategies, different what I perceive are negative coping strategies. Like I had let go of drugs that wasn't a part of my life anymore, but I developed a lot of eating disorders, lots of really nasty stuff with food came up because I just didn't know how to cope with like the fact that I was allowed to actually live a life. And yeah, like again, feelings of unworthiness. Like, is this actually meant for me?
And I'm thinking, did you know what normal life looked like? Because it doesn't sound like it.
Definitely not, but I had been reprogrammed inside of that facility. And, I knew that I had dreams and goals that I wanted to accomplish. And I just didn't know if I was worthy of actually accomplishing them. So after I left treatment, I did a lot of shadow work, like I didn't have a phone or the internet for 17 months. And so everything that I had learned inside of that treatment center was just through books. And, there isn't a lot of books that I could find at the local library anyway about like deep beliefs around spirituality. So I had and now I had access to the internet, so I could find all of these different routes of healing. And so I understood what the dark night of the soul was. I did a lot of shadow work and I started to heal those different pieces of myself. My self-saboteur, she loves having like the front and center in my life. She loves to, like stir things up. And so I had to really like develop a design around all these different pieces of myself. Like I took every aspect of myself and I did character development around it. So my addiction looks a certain way. It's a man. He has a name. He has a voice, like he wears a particular outfit. My eating disorders, they all have their own personality profiles as well. My inner saboteur, and then also my light, my angels, my guides, they all have character development around them as well. And those were some of the tools that I used coming into the world, was that I'm not alone and I can see that these things are actually outside myself. They're not actually me. And
How
so
was
if
you
I can
able to do that, to separate that?
Yeah, just by I did some shadow work and I read this great book. It's called Heal Your Inner Wounds by Abby Wynn. And in her book, she goes through a lot of visualization and a lot of character development, like deep, detailed character development. I developed my inner baby, my inner child, my inner teenager, my young adult. And through that process, I was able to develop all of these coping strategies that came through the inner teenager and the inner young adult. And yeah, it's so profound for me. And like I said, they all have names and faces and voices. And so when I hear them, like my addiction, he still talks to me, he's like, just one. You're walking past the liquor store, like, what's the big deal? Nobody's gonna know. And so I have to say, like, Richard, chill out. Like not today. Like check back in an hour. We'll see how I'm feeling. And like, and then I have tools in my life on how to handle things like that. Like because I'm part of a 12-step fellowship and because I have spiritual tools in my life today.
Interesting. Do you feel like you have any kind of abilities or anything after?
When I came back from the experience, I had a lot of abilities. One of my favorite, it's like spiritual tools to use for discernment is I open up a book to a random page and it speaks to me. It's called The Art of Bibliomancy. If you don't know the name for it, I didn't know it, and it's like my greatest gift for sure. I can open up a book to a random page and it's a message directly for me. And when I came back from the experience, the books would be highlighted. Like I would open up the book to a random page and the text that I was supposed to read actually had like a light box around it. And so that was like a beautiful gift, but it was really scary for me. Like this was all so far away from what I had known. And, for the longest time after my experience and still even a little bit today, I just thought that I had died. I thought, okay, I'm dead, and this is whatever I got to do to go back to heaven, like my whole life was just about how do I get back to that space. And so, they told me I had to do recovery. All right, I'm doing recovery. When do I get to go home? Like, am I finished? I got 30 days clean. I got 60 days clean. I got a year clean. What do I do? Like, when do I get to go home? And like I said, I found that it's not about going home. It's about bringing home here. And, but I asked to have my gifts turned down. Like I had experienced telepathy with other people. I had like this strong sense of people's truths and what they were hiding from their true self. And, I didn't know how to filter any of it. And some of these gifts happened when I was still in active addiction. So I would go up to random people on the street and I'd be like, you're lying to your family. You're cheating on your wife. You need to tell them. And, like random people on the street flipping out. Like, what are you talking about? Going up to like families and saying this stuff. It was crazy. But I just thought that I was dead and that there was no consequences to anything that I did. I didn't take into the account that these other people are having real lives. I just thought that they were all extras in my movie. And, like this self-obsession, this self-centeredness, that's something that goes along with the dis-ease of addiction. And it took so much integration, but I did ask to have all of my gifts turned down. Like when I came back, I could channel all the archangels and like I said, everything just really frightened me. And I thought, well, how am I ever going to fit into normal society? Like you guys told me to come back and live a life without drugs. And now I'm just as weird as a person who, obsessively uses drugs because now I have all of these sort of strange, like spiritual gifts. So, today my life it's not as pronounced with the spiritual gifts, but I do have this amazing gift of being able to bring community together. People feel really comfortable around me to tell me like their secrets, their shame, and I just sit there as this vessel to take in what they have to say. And for me, that's a beautiful spiritual gift.
Yeah. People don't have time, it seems, for anybody that has a problem of any kind, that needs any work or oh, I don't need that negativity in my life. And so, yeah. Well, it sounds great. Sounds like you're doing well. You seem so highly intelligent. I mean, have you like thought about furthering a degree or anything?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a friend and he had said to me, like, the way that you talk doesn't make sense for the way that you were raised. And, like all of this sort of intelligence and these conscious thoughts and like this, like more pronounced vocabulary only came into my awareness after my awakening. Like before my awakening, I didn't have any thoughts about anything except for when can I get drugs? Where am I getting them? How can I use them? Who do I have to use them with? And that was the extent of my thought process. I never had any conscious thoughts ever. And like I said, when I went into treatment, I just devoured like every book that I could get my hands on. And yeah, this stream of consciousness had sort of come into me. And, like I said, I got certified. I became a peer advocate. I do that for work. And, like my life experience, I feel like is much more valuable than any sort of like letters behind my name. Although I do have an insatiable thirst to educate myself and for knowledge. Like I feel like by connecting with other people, I get this beautiful depth of experience and information, as opposed to maybe like devoting a bunch of time to going to school. But who knows, like wherever the universe takes me, I'm on the surfboard for the ride.
I was a primary counselor at a drug clinic back 2010. And yeah, I didn't really have a knack for it. I never had been an addict, and they knew that. And so they're like, but yet it seemed like the ones that had been addicts, then working there was not a good thing.
Yeah,
they would start craving.
My counselor at the rehab that I was in, she was not an addict. And some of the girls there were like, I don't want her as my counselor. She doesn't get me. But the way that I looked at it was, this woman can teach me how to be a person without using drugs, because she has never used drugs. And I was really eager and anxious to hear and learn from her, because I wanted to know how to go about life without having to use drugs to cope with my experience. So yeah, there's like both sides to the coin. But I do find that in my line of work now, people are much more free to open up to me because they know that I have a similar life experience.
I remember one patient said that his aha moment was he was so dope sick, which I didn't know what that meant till I started working there. And, all he could do every day was just, try to find drugs so he wouldn't be sick. And he saw this really old woman out push mowing her lawn. And he thought he couldn't even do that. Here's that old lady out there push mowing her lawn, and he was too sick to hardly walk down the street.
Wow.
And I don't know why that stuck with me. It's just kind of to think, how physically damaged they are when, I don't know personally, but when you're under that addiction.
Yeah, it is, like the way that I see it now is, like addiction for me is like this, it's an ego manifestation of self-obsession, self-centeredness. And it tethers you to earth in such a way, like I didn't realize it until after, but the pain that I was experiencing going through heroin withdrawal, I would go through heroin withdrawal every so often when I didn't have enough money for drugs, or, I'd only get like a day into it, and then I would find a way to make money to get drugs. But the way that I perceive it now is like a complete and utter rebirth. I see the imagery of the phoenix rising from the ashes. And so, like when you're going through heroin withdrawal, it really feels like your skin and your bones are on fire. Like it really feels like fire inside.
Hold on a second. Jim, it's right there beside you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it really feels like fire inside your skin, inside your bones. And now I see it as like, that was my spirit trying to come alive, like it was trying to break out of the cycle of addiction and come alive. But every time it would start to fire up, I would say I would extinguish it with more drugs, because I couldn't imagine what that would be like. And I'm just so grateful in my journey now. I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for that instantaneous healing, I don't know if I ever would have stopped using drugs.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Was there anything else that you didn't get to cover, or?
No, I feel pretty complete. Thank you so much for letting me share this story.
You're welcome. Well, have a happy New Year.
Thanks so much.
I had 1 hour sleep. I don't know what's wrong with me. I couldn't sleep last night, so I'm kind of like groggy. So, all right, thank you.
Grateful for you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.